Okay, so now we're at page 2 of the WB-11, the residential offer to purchase. And so what I'm going to recommend about page 2, that's really boilerplate. What I'm going to recommend though is you read through it multiple times so you know what's there. In fact, it talks about occupancy, which is I never want to forget about because in some states, occupancy is given days after closing. So I want to make certain that everybody knows that the way this is languaged is that occupancy is given at the time of closing unless there's something else agreed to. And then we talk about some definitions. So actual receipt, that's for delivery of documents and notices. Conditions affecting the property. Again, defects would be one of those. And so that's a really great thing to read through with your buyer when you get to the inspection contingency language because it'll let them know what really is considered a defect by that respect. So just spend some time on that, and then it goes on to continue that list on page 4. We're going to go to page 3 though, because that's the next page that we can fill blanks out in. And right at the top, I see this mistake made quite often. The property address doesn't get filled in. So you want to fill that in, and I think we are at 123 Main Street, right, for this one, and it was in the village of Belleville. It's uh, Wisconsin, so there we go. Now it's there, filled in for us. The next paragraph talks about closing, and it says a transaction is to be closed no later than blank date at a place selected by the seller unless otherwise agreed to by the parties in writing. So this is what we're shooting for closing, and so today is May 1st. I'm going to take a look at the calendar. And let's say the buyer is in a position that their lease is up at the end of June. So we're going to go look at June. That gives us 45 to 60 days to get all the things in place, the appraisal, the financing if they're doing it, all of that. Now here's what I'm going to recommend though. Don't choose the 29th. And here's why, because that's a very crazy closing day. Every loan officer and every title company rep is going to be super busy. So if anything goes a little sideways that day, chances are it won't close. So give the buyers a little time if we can negotiate that with the seller. So what I'd recommend is you go the Friday before on the 22nd and give them, now it's going to cost them a little bit because they're going to own the house for an extra week without while they're still in a rental agreement. Yet I still think that's a smarter move if it really is about getting the deal closed. So we're going to choose June 22nd. Next area talks about prorations, and prorations would be a calculation of costs that have already been paid going back to the buyer or the seller that would benefit the buyer down the road, or items that the seller would owe at some point in time that haven't been paid yet. The biggest one really is property taxes. So in Wisconsin, we pay our property taxes in arrears, which means that when the tax bill comes in December, that's for that year. So in December 2018, we're going to get a tax bill for the property, and that will be for all of 2018. Now, arguably, the seller has only owned the property for the first 5.5 months in 2018. So we want to make certain that the buyer gets credited what that estimated cost for that period of time for taxes would be, and that'll show up as a credit on the closing statement with for the buyer, a debit to the seller at the time of closing if we bring language into that. So along with that, it's sometimes if it's a rental property, there'd be rents, there'd be prepaid insurance if it can be assumed. Private and municipal charges, property owners associations assessment, fuel. Sometimes if there's an LP tank, you'll want to prorate for that because they'll have it filled to a certain level. They've paid for it, the seller has, and so the buyer might offer to pay for what's left in that type of thing. In this case, we're going to say there aren't any others, so we're keeping this pretty clean. And then we go to property taxes. So this is the big one, and there's really a couple options that the seller or buyer has here to ask of the seller. Now, again, this is all negotiable. But the three options would be option one would be the net to prorate at the time of closing based on the net real estate taxes for 2017 or for this year if it's available, but it won't be because we're only in the middle of the year. And again, most municipalities, in fact, all of them send the tax bill out in December. Um, so if it was that one, it would be based on last year's taxes, or if you don't choose any boxes, that's what the default is. Second box is we could take the current assessment times the current mill rate. And now that we're into May, I think in most municipalities in Dane County at least, that assessment for 2018 has come out. So that might be a good option at this point because of the time of year we're in. And then they would use that against last year's mill rate because the mill rate doesn't get determined until the budgets are set, which is typically in a November, early December process in all municipalities. Or the third option would be to do the sale price multiplied by what fair market values are used by the assessor in the prior year, multiplied by the current mill rate. So that may be when you use, for example, in new construction. That might give your buyer a little bit of a leg up because in new construction, the condition of the property as of January 1st is what the mill rate is, or the tax assessment is set at. So let's say January 1st it was just a foundation. Now it's a complete house. The house is done or will be done by June 22nd. And so that's a little sneaky, but works to the benefit of the buyer if you were to do that because you do the sale price times the mill rate. And that would give the, the buyer a little opportunity to make a little money on the deal. So again, a little sneaky, yet sometimes it works. And so we're going to choose this one, line 127, the mill rate times the current assessment. And then what you could also do, though, is that the buyer and seller could agree that at the time the actual tax bill comes, that they get back together and they recalculate that credit against what the actual bill was against the proration, and they adjust that way. Now, just a note on this: this is lines 135 through 139. That's post closing, so it's for them to do with each other. It's not to get the real estate agents involved. So if the buyer's really hung up on it, that's an option. Not a great one, yet it's one that they could choose to use. So go on, and we talked about leased properties. So it says if the property is currently leased, the leases do extend beyond closing. That's always the case unless there was something in the tenant's lease that allowed for it to be different. So if that's the case, then the seller assigns the leases to the new owner and all security deposits and any prepaid rents to the buyer at closing. And if they are written or oral leases, the terms are blank, and you'd put that in. Insert additional terms, if any, for that. Now, here's the deal: if this is leased property and the buyer's going to continue to keep it that way, I would grab and add addendum R, which I believe it is for rental property. I'd add that to the offer because that deals with multiple appliances, it deals with leases, it deals with the time for the buyer to review the leases, that type of thing. Um, we're going to assume that this isn't leased, that they're going to just keep it as a single family residential. What you might choose to do, you wouldn't have to, but you could, is you could strike through all of this language. So I could highlight it. I'm just showing you that that's an option you've got. And I'm going to go back up here to strike through, and I'm just going to strike through it. And then the next strike through is rental weatherization. That was a change in state statute, so that's gone now, so we don't even have to deal with it. So that's why it's pre-struck for you. The next area talks about the real estate condition report. So you're going to want to read this paragraph and understand it. Understand it. Here's my philosophy on a condition report. From a seller perspective, the seller's best opportunity to really be is to be upfront, meaning disclose, disclose, disclose. Because what this says in the language is that when the buyer makes the offer, they're making the offer with the knowledge of what's disclosed in the property condition report. For example, then, if they're making that with that knowledge, they really don't have the right to come back after inspection and ask for something to be done that was already disclosed to them. Now, unless they were to carve it out under additional provisions. So let's say, for example, on the condition report it said, roof has leaked a few times, probably near the end of its life expectancy. That was on the property condition report. And so your buyer signs that report at the time of the offer. Yet down here you might say buyer reserves the right for roof inspection and to bring any issues around this into the inspection contingency. So what that's saying is, buyer acknowledges that. However, they want to look at it deeper. And if for some reason in that inspection it shows that it's way worse than they thought it was, it's going to be $15,000 because it's a full tear off, and there's sheathing. There's all kinds of issues. There's rafters that are rotten, that kind of stuff. They could use that as a way to kill the deal, for lack of a better way to say it. So that's what you could do. So then we want to date the property condition report, and let's say that was signed. Let's say that was signed last Friday. So we're going to reference that. and it says which was received by the buyer prior to the buyer signing this offer, and which is made a part of the offer by reference, and anything else. So that's you could put this same language there, and that's pages 2 and 3. So so again, the best thing in all of this is just read it, read it, read it, and you'll do a great job filling these out. Thanks.